All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really dense, foundational Islamic text, Sahih Muslim, specifically focusing on the Book of Faith. Whether you're deeply familiar with this material already or you're encountering it for the very first time, our goal today is to map out the exact boundaries of belief, exactly as this monumental text defines them. To really grasp the immense historical weight of this source material, you just have to look at the staggering ratio of the compilation process. Out of a massive pool of 300,000 evaluated traditions, only about 4,000 actually made the final cut. That is literally a 1.3% acceptance rate. This wasn't just some casual gathering of campfire stories. It was an incredibly stringent filtering process designed to capture what the compiler considered the absolute most authentic sayings and actions of Prophet Muhammad. Because we're navigating such an incredibly detailed theological text, here's our roadmap for today. First, compiling the Sahih Muslim. Second, Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. Third, virtues and social conduct. And finally, hypocrisy and major sins.
Okay, Section 1. Compiling the Sahih Muslim, the historical foundation.
The compiler of all this, Muslim bin al-Hajjaj, lived from 202 to 261 in the Islamic lunar calendar. And during this time, he didn't just sit comfortably in a library somewhere. He traveled extensively across Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Egypt to gather these traditions. He was essentially a traveling academic, tirelessly tracking down the oral history of the Islamic faith from the very people who preserved it across vast geographical distances.
So how exactly did he filter 300,000 reports down to just 4,000? Well, Sahih Muslim establishes its credibility through an incredibly demanding verification process. Every single report went through a rigorous academic gauntlet. It had to perfectly align with the Quran, and the chain of transmission, the whole who heard it from whom aspect, had to be painstakingly verified. If even a single link in that human chain was deemed unreliable, the tradition was completely discarded, no exceptions.
Moving right along to Section 2, Islam, Iman, and Ihsan, defining the core. Right in the opening chapters of the Book of Faith, a literal question asked by the Prophet's companions serves as the narrative engine to define three vital concepts. It completely reframes theology. It's not a dry lecture, it's an active, unfolding inquiry. These profound definitions are anchored by a really vivid micronarrative. Picture this. The angel Gabriel appears disguised as an unrecognizable traveler. But weirdly, he has no signs of a journey on him at all. He's wearing crisp, pure white clothes, has extraordinarily black hair, and he sits intimately close to the Prophet to publicly interview him. This dramatic public interview was intentionally designed to teach the onlookers, and us, the readers, the absolute basics of the religion. And this brilliantly illustrates how the source separates physical, outward actions of submission from the internal, unseen tenets of belief. When asked about Islam, the Prophet answers with physical actions, establishing prayer, paying the poor rate, fasting, and performing the pilgrimage. But when asked about Iman, or faith, the answer pivots entirely inward. It becomes all about internal belief in Allah, angels, the divine books, messengers, the Day of Judgment, and divine decree. One is what you do, the other is what you hold deep in your heart. Then, building on those actions and beliefs, we hit the absolute highest state of spiritual awareness, Ihsan. It leaves zero ambiguity about the ultimate goal of the believer. It combines the outward action of Islam and the inward belief of Iman into a constant, living mindfulness. You worship as if you can literally see the divine, knowing that even though you can't, you are always being seen. All right, let's look at Section 3, Virtues and Social Conduct, Faith in Practice. So how does all this high-level faith actually translate into everyday life? Sahih Muslim tackles the question of the best of deeds by categorizing dozens of rulings into easily digestible buckets of daily behavior. It doesn't just leave faith floating in the theoretical realm, it brings it right down to earth, specifically to how a person operates within their community. According to the compilation, the logical flow of virtues begins with faith and prayer, but it immediately extends outward into family conduct. When asked multiple times what the best deeds are, it consistently lists belief and timely prayer, followed right on their heels by kindness to one's parents, before moving on to broader social struggles, or jihad, in the cause of the faith. The structure here is fascinating, right? It bridges the divine right down to the domestic. And here is a crucial takeaway. True faith must result in physical and verbal harmlessness to one's community. We see this repeated continuously in the text. The best among the believers is the one who does not harm others with their words or their actions. Faith is intrinsically linked to social safety. This source material shows us that faith isn't just one monolithic thing. It ranges from massive theological declarations to simply moving a rock off a shared road. In fact, there are over 70 branches of faith detailed here. At the absolute summit is the declaration that there is no God but Allah. But importantly, the humblest branch is just making a public path safe for others to walk on. Modesty is also heavily emphasized as a core ingredient of this entire faith structure. Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, Hypocrisy and Major Sins, the Boundaries of Belief.
Once again, the narrative uses the inquiries of the prophet's companions to establish the strict red lines of the faith. These are the absolute deal breakers within the theological framework. What's incredibly interesting here is how cleanly the major theological transgressions are separated from toxic, everyday social behaviors. Think about the gravest major sins for a second: polytheism, disobedience to parents, and giving false testimony. But then, consider the signs of a hypocrite. A hypocrite isn't defined here by failing to pray. They are defined by lying, breaking promises, and betraying trust. Even if they pray and fast, these everyday social betrayals are marked as the true defining indicators of hypocrisy.
These heavy theological rulings are brought to life through a wildly dramatic anecdote from the battlefield regarding assumptions of faith. The companion Usama bin Zayd overpowered an enemy soldier. Right as Usama was about to strike, the soldier declared his faith in Allah. Assuming the man was just saying it to save his own life, which, let's be honest, most of us would probably assume too, Usama killed him anyway. But when the Prophet heard about this, his reaction established a massive precedent. The Prophet delivered a powerful rebuke to emphasize a strict red line. Humans are absolutely forbidden from judging the internal sincerity of another person. He repeated this question over and over to Usama. It didn't matter if the timing of the conversion seemed highly convenient on a literal battlefield. The outward declaration of faith is the absolute limit of human jurisdiction. Furthermore, there are severe limits placed on taking a life or baselessly labeling others as infidels. If a person calls a fellow Muslim an unbeliever, the rulings state that the label of unbelief basically ricochets right back onto the accuser. The text also sets hard boundaries against self-harm, noting that suicide leads to eternal torment, and that raising weapons against one's own community constitutes an act of literal unbelief. We really see the emotional weight of these boundaries in the compelling story of the Prophet's own uncle refusing to convert despite desperate pleas. Abu Talib, who protected the Prophet for years, was dying. The Prophet begged him to simply profess the faith so he could intercede for him on the Day of Judgment. However, tribal leaders in the room pressured Abu Talib not to abandon the religion of his ancestors, and out of fear of bringing shame to his legacy, he refused the Prophet's request right at the end. This specific revelation underscores the impartial framing of the text. Ultimate guidance and judgment reside completely outside of human hands. Even the Prophet himself could not force belief into the heart of an uncle he deeply loved. It perfectly caps off the overarching theme of this whole section. The internal reality of Iman belongs exclusively to the divine. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought based on the structured layers of faith we've just unpacked today. There are incredibly strict boundaries around our physical, outward behaviors, how we treat our neighbors, what we say, moving harm from a road. Yet the internal state of the heart is fiercely protected from any human judgment whatsoever. It's a truly incredible balance between demanding public virtue and protecting private conscience. Thanks for joining me on this explainer of the Book of Faith.